Another NFL Combine is officially in the books, and now John Schneider has a little over 7 weeks until he makes his first draft without Pete Carroll. Which players is he going to be bringing in the 2024 NFL Draft? I'm going to be dishing out my post-Combine mock draft here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Spanaway, Washington, or Grand Forks, North Dakota. We appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The NFL Combine officially in the books, wrapping up with offensive line workouts yesterday. We're going to be dishing out some big winners from day 3 and day 4, looking at offensive linemen as well as offensive skill players and, of course, quarterbacks. And we'll tackle your questions. It's the return of our Monday mailbag segment. But first, we are going to be getting to my first 7-round mock draft of this draft cycle. And we're going to let Rob Rang play the Mel Kiper role today. You get to either love my picks or absolutely roast them. And so we're going to get to that here in a moment on this jam-packed episode brought to you by FanDuel. Every moment, make every moment more with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The 2024 NFL Combine has come and gone, and of course, a lot of excitement. We had the great historical workouts, the awesome interviews, all the things going on behind the scenes as well that we may start to see some ripple effects here in the next few days. Russell Wilson getting cut by the Broncos, for example. With that being said, we're only 7 weeks away from the draft, Rob, and with the Combine now wrapped up, I decided to dish out my first 7-round mock draft of the cycle. I know that you always look forward to this on Mock Draft Monday when you get the chance to put on the critic's hat, and I turned 7 picks into 10, including 5 selections in the first 3 rounds. I think that's where the value is going to be, where teams are going to try to move around the board, is those first 3 rounds. So keeping that in mind, my first set of picks for you to look at, good sir, I actually traded down twice in the first round, which, oh, by the way, John Schneider has done 2 other times. So that is not unprecedented. Got Graham Barton, the guard from Duke. Added a second-round pick, one of those trade downs. Rook Ororo, the defensive tackle from Clemson. In the third round, pick 76, Junior Colson. A couple picks later, I get a quarterback in Michael Pratt from Tulane, and wrap up a busy third round with Ben Sinnott, the tight end from Kansas State. So I've got myself 2 defensive players, 3 offensive players, turning 3 selections into 5.
Yeah, Corbin, hey, I have a great deal of respect for John Schneider, but if he is able to pull off the magistry that you just pulled off in this mock draft scenario, then I think that he is going to be earning consensus A's across the board. Look, I love the boldness of the trade down and still being able to get some players here. I think that basically check the boxes as immediate starters, not only on the offensive line in your very first selection in Graham Barton, who is my personal top-rated guard in this draft class. And I'll get into that conversation here a little bit later because I'm a big fan of Troy Fautanu, who some are projecting to guard, but others view him as a tackle. But Graham Barton, should the Seahawks lose Damian Lewis in free agency, I think that is a very real scenario here. Then Graham Barton, given his size, given his physicality, I think that he is basically be a plug-and-play fit, and so make an awful lot of sense should he be the Seahawks' first-round selection. And I think that he would be a great value pick there at number 25 overall. If you're going to stick in the ACC, then Rook Ororo, the big defensive tackle, and is supremely athletic defensive tackle with that. In fact, that if I was going to push back on this draft, I do think that Ororo at that point in the draft, number 56 overall, Corbin, I think you might be 30 spots late when it's all said and done. This is a guy who ran a 4.8 940, 6'4", 300 plus pounds, and then put up 29 repetitions with 34-inch arms. I mean, that is one of the great athletic achievements of this year's combine. Then you put it into perspective with this tape, and this is a really good football player, an ascending player at that, Nigerian-born kid whose best football is still ahead of him. So to me, that would be one of the question marks here. I love the selection, of course, of the in the third round of Junior Colson, the middle linebacker from Michigan, who of course Mike McDonald is going to know very, very well. Again, though, I just question whether or not he's actually going to be it there at that spot. If he is, then this is a home run selection for the Seahawks. He is among the most pro-ready linebackers in this draft class, in my opinion. So I'd love that selection. You get quarterback too, one of my absolute favorites, in Michael Pratt from Tulane, 4-year starter, beat USC in the Holiday Bowl a couple of years ago, competes at the Senior Bowl, competes at the Combine, doesn't have this flashiest of skill sets, but still has all of the different traits that John Schneider has always prioritized. I think that he has the mental ability to be able to make a very quick transition into Ryan Grubb's offense. So, and then Ben Sinnott, the tight end, I mean, who is, just basically just a bowling ball after the catch, very soft hands, and had some spectacular plays for the last couple of seasons. So to me, again, if the Seahawks are able to pull off the heist that is day one and day two of your mock draft, sir, then I feel very confident the Seahawks are going to be marching themselves right back to the playoffs in 2024.
Now let's get to those last 4 rounds, because that's really where championship football teams are made. Not that the stars early on don't make Super Bowl champions, because they certainly are crucial, but you got to be able to draft well on day 3. And that's something the Seahawks have prided themselves with under John Schneider. And I continue to make moves. I made one other trading down with the Kansas City Chiefs to recoup an extra 5th-round pick to give me 10 selections. I don't think day 3 is going to be a day where you're going to see as much trading down, just because there is a drop-off in talent, not as much depth in this draft class in a lot of positions. But in the 4th round with the pick I traded down, I'm higher on this kid than a lot of people. Malik Mustafa from Wake Forest. I think he is a free safety that's got some hybrid capabilities. I've got him there at 133. 2 5th-rounders, Kyrie Jackson from Oregon, a 6'3" corner. Now, some of you may wonder, why am I picking a tall, lanky corner? Well, Mike Jackson's a restricted free agent, so there's a chance he's not back. Kamani Vidal, my gem at running back, getting him with that extra pick added from the Chiefs at 158. And then 2 other picks in the 6th round, Jaquan Jackson from Tulane. He used to catch passes for Michael Pratt, really good kick returner, has some Tyler Lockett-type qualities. And in the 7th round, one of my gems in this entire draft class from Temple. I don't know if he gets to the 7th round now from what he did at the Combine. And if you watch the tape, Jordan McGee is a top 6, top 7 linebacker, maybe higher than that in this draft class. He's a playmaker, but he's still really under the radar. If you could get him late on day 3 to go with Junior Colson, you might have a Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright type combination in a few years in Mike McDonald's scheme.
Yeah, you might. McGee's a good football player, as you said. He is a guy that is physical and proved himself to be much more athletic than I think a lot of people gave him credit for. So, yeah, I agree with you. In the 7th round, pick 233 overall, I'm not so sure that he is going to be available. But still, I love the thinking there. Again, as we know, the Seahawks have 3 free agents at the inside linebacker position, and Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, and Devin Bush. And so to select 2 in this draft class, even though it isn't a terrific draft class for linebackers, it does feel realistic. The Seahawks are going to invest heavily at that position, and kind of just working our way backwards. I like the fact that you kind of double dip there in Tulane with Jaquan Jackson, and you referred to the fact that he is a special teamer as well as a wideout. A 4'4" guy, excels in the slot, has straight line speed as well. But again, one of the things that I think that the Seahawks were intrigued, and one of the reasons why they did some interviews with Jaquan Jackson, is just wanting to know a little bit about who Michael Pratt, the quarterback, is, and is he really the leader that all of the hype suggests that he is? But I like the selection of Jaquan Jackson. And quickly, I'm going to focus in on those 2 defensive backs that you mentioned, because I know you're a big fan of Vidal, the running back. I am as well. But I want to focus in on Mustafa and Kyrie Jackson, the corner from Oregon. first off, with Kyrie Jackson, we're talking about a guy who is 6'3", 200 pounds, got arms for days, former Alabama guy, comes to Oregon and winds up becoming their most accomplished defensive back and a leader on the field for them. So there's an awful lot of things about him that check a bunch of Seahawks boxes, even now past the Pete Carroll era. And Mustafa, I love your eye for talent, Corbin. I mean, this is a guy that fits in with what the Seahawks have traditionally done. Kind of reminds me, gives me some Quandre Diggs kind of vibes with just his physicality, his awareness, his closing speed. You know, we don't know that the Seahawks are going to be bringing Jamal Adams back. So if that is indeed the case, then a safety, perhaps even higher than the fifth round, could be, or fourth round, could be a priority for the Seahawks. So again, Mustafa, this is not a great class of safeties, but Mustafa is one of my absolute favorites in the middle rounds.
Yeah, I think if the Seahawks were able to reel in even a handful of those players, that me personally, and again, I've still got a lot of guys to get through on film, but I'd be pretty excited. And there's certainly some prospects I'm higher on than some of our listeners are. I know there's some I'm higher on than you are, and vice versa. And the fun thing is, next Monday, we get to flip roles, and I get to dive into your 7-round mock draft and play the critique role. Up next, we are going to get to our Monday mailbag segment. We got a lot of headlines to cover, and many of you have asked about them in our mailbag. We're going to get to those here in a moment on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, such as who's going to make the first basket of the night. Live same-game parlays, including Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, to each score 25 points in the Celtics' next game. And exclusive props, such as when the lowly Washington Wizards will actually win another game, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in all across the country or outside the United States. We have tons of awesome listeners listening in from outside of the U.S. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. It's time to bring back the Monday mailbag. Last week was Combine week, so we had a lot of mock draft and Combine-related stuff to hit on, but we're bringing the mailbag back, and there's some fun topics this week, Rob. Our first question, and I think this is going to be one that fascinates you, coming from R. Walro on X. With him being busy with the coaching search at the time, do you think John Schneider places as heavy an emphasis on Senior Bowl players this year as he and Pete Carroll have in the past?
That's a really interesting question. I do think that there's a possibility that the Seahawks do, in fact, invest even more time into the Senior Bowl evaluation process, not just because it's the Senior Bowl or the East-West Shrine Bowl or whatever the case might be. I just think that there is going to be possibly a scenario, just like what you projected in the mock draft just a couple of moments ago, Corbin, where the Seahawks look to trade down and really take full advantage of the fact that they have a head coach, an offensive coordinator, and a special teams coordinator. Certainly Adam Durde knows these college prospects as well, but they don't have the perspective that, say, a Ryan Grubb, a Scott Huff, or a Jay Harbaugh might have, given their college experience. So that's the biggest reason why, Corbin. The Seahawks currently have 7 selections in this draft. I would not be surprised at all if they make it more like 10. And again, one of the areas in which the Seahawks have succeeded in the past so consistently is by plucking some of those players from the Senior Bowl. The fact that their former quarterback coach, or at least assistant quarterback coach, assistant wide receiver coach, Kerry Joseph, was working with the American team quarterbacks this year in Mobile, that is the kind of perspective that I think the Seahawks are going to continue to rely upon.
Our next question here coming from Bach Seahawks. If Brock Bowers is available at 16, would you prefer taking him or moving back? This is a very tricky question, Rob, because I love Brock Bowers. He is probably the best tight end prospect that we've seen come out of the draft in the last, it's probably been 10 to 12 years. I mean, he has it all. The guy can block. He's an incredible receiver. Maybe the best route running tight end that I've seen come into the league in terms of polish. He brings it all. and measured in a little better than I think some people thought he was going to at the combine. So any reservations people had about that was not something I was concerned about. This guy would absolutely be worth number 16. You and I echo these sentiments. I don't think he's there at 16, but this question is based on the idea if he is there. I think John Schneider, a lot of this would depend on what they end up doing at the tight end position in free agency. If they bring back Noah Fant and or Colby Parkinson, if Will Dissly's still in the roster, I mean, that may not be a position they're willing to invest that high of a pick in. But if they lose one or both those guys in free agency and maybe cut Dissly as a cap casualty, and this position becomes a glaring need, this is a blue chip talent that doesn't come around very much. And so I think it is certainly possible that John Schneider could make this selection here. But right now, I just think it's way too early to tell because we have to see how the rest of the roster bears out here in free agency. If they have a number of tight ends on the roster, then I think John Schneider's going to be hard-pressed to make a move here. But if they have openings at that spot and it really is an area of need, imagine putting this guy with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Oh, and by the way, the running backs they've got. This would be a really fun weapon to add to their passing game, who also can bring a blocking element as well. Our next question for Rob, another prospect in the first round to consider here from Alex H0185. Is Cooper DeJean in play with the Seahawks first pick with his versatility to play all positions in the secondary, giving Seattle one of the top secondaries in the league?
I think on paper he should be. Cooper DeJean is an absolute ball hawk. Regardless of where Iowa lined him up, whether it be at safety, whether it be a linebacker, whether it be outside corner, whether it be a nickel corner, whether it be a return man, Cooper DeJean made plays throughout his entire college career. That said, the Seahawks have so many resources already allocated in their secondary. So unless the club is going to be making some big time moves, and starting off with, possibly letting go Jamal Adams, possibly reworking the contract, of Quandre. I do think that the Seahawks need to focus elsewhere. It's kind of like the conversation that you just had a moment ago there with Brock Bowers. I mean, that's a really talented football player like Cooper DeJean, who I think could come in and make an immediate impact and make John Schneider and Mike McDonald look like geniuses. Does it actually get you more victories, though? Just because you have the best secondary in the NFC, at least on paper, does that actually result in more wins? That, to me, is one of the biggest conversations. I still would argue that the Seahawks' biggest area of concern is along the line of scrimmage. And, with all due respect to Brock Bowers and Cooper DeJean, they don't play those spots. And so, therefore, I think a trade-down scenario or going with, again, somebody along the line of scrimmage makes a little bit more sense in this stage of the game.
Our next question from PNW Professor on X. Why didn't the Seahawks offer a position to KJ Wright on their staff? Why let him go to the enemy in San Francisco? One of the smartest players of our generation, praised and respected by Ray Lewis, and yet Jody Allen lets him walk. So just to put some perspective here, for listeners that haven't heard today, KJ All Day podcast, which I believe is going to be discontinued now because he announced he is going to join the San Francisco 49ers coaching staff as an assistant linebacker coach and a defensive quality control coach. Now, I want to squash some of the things in this question, and not that there's a bad question at all, but just some information that has been brought to light. KJ Wright reached out to Mike McDonald and the Seahawks front office about a coaching position because it was clear at this point, after 2 years away from the game, he had that itch. It was time for him to get back into the NFL and to get started as a coach. So he wanted to be on Seattle's staff, and there was some mutual interest there. Here's the problem, though. You don't have Pete Carroll as your head coach anymore. I think if Pete Carroll was still the head coach, KJ Wright right now is on his staff. It would have been done. But Mike McDonald had a former player of his own in Josh Bynes, who also was in consideration for that assistant linebacker spot. And the familiarity he had with him, some of these former players the Seahawks had, they're just not going to have the same connection. I know that's disappointing to some fans, but when you don't have the same coach, you bring in an outsider like Mike McDonald, who isn't from Seattle, he's going to bring in some of his own guys as part of the equation. And Josh Bynes, like KJ Wright, is making his first NFL coaching appearance. So it really was an even situation with two guys. I think that KJ Wright was the much better player overall, but both these guys had really successful NFL careers, and Bynes knows McDonald's system. So this was not about pushing KJ Wright away. This is Mike McDonald making the selection. And hey, this is who I think is going to be best for my staff. Josh Bynes has played for me multiple times. He knows what I expect system-wise. I think KJ Wright could have worked, but that would have been maybe a puzzle piece that didn't necessarily mesh completely because he hadn't played for Mike McDonald. So that's the reality. This isn't a situation where I think KJ was looking to thwart the Seahawks. The opportunity was in San Francisco, and he took that opportunity. Our last question, Rob, you and I both get to answer this one. This is the big news today with Russell Wilson officially being released by the Denver Broncos. Which trade will go down as the worst? Jamal Adams to the Seahawks or Russell Wilson to the Broncos? This from David N345 on Threads.
Well, I think from a Seahawks perspective, certainly the Seattle's feel a lot better about trading Russell Wilson than acquiring Jamal Adams. But that tongue-in-cheek kind of response here, I think that really the greater point here is that the breaking news that the Denver Broncos have at least reportedly made the decision that they are officially going to be cutting ties to Russell Wilson. He is going to be a free agent. There's going to be some of you out there who are going to be wondering if the Seahawks might have some interest in bringing Russell Wilson back. I don't think that's going to be the case, certainly just because the fact that Russell Wilson is going to be looking for a starting opportunity. And I think like the Seahawks know that Geno Smith is their guy. If there is going to be anybody who's going to be pushing Geno Smith, I think it's going to be a relatively high selection on a quarterback in this draft class. But again, getting back to the point of the question, I do think that the trade for Jamal Adams, considering what Seattle get for a safety, there have been teams that have gambled on quarterbacks and it just didn't work out. But the Seahawks gambled on a safety. He had obviously some success here with the Seattle in setting the NFL record for the most sacks. But the injuries just basically cut down all of that potential. So if you're going to ask about the worst trades in NFL history, unfortunately, I do have to put the Seahawks trade for Jamal Adams, given what they gave up, how much that they paid in free agency, how much they paid for his contract, and the lack of production that he turned in. Unfortunately, that ranks right up there with some of the worst moves that any team has made in the NFL history, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is really comparing apples to oranges or maybe even apples to bananas because these are just two totally different style trades. You hadn't seen a team give up that many high draft picks for safety. The process there was very questionable at the time to get Jamal Adams. But I'm going to actually go with the Wilson trade being the worst of the two, and here's why. At least Seattle got an all-pro season out of Jamal Adams before the injuries hit, and they won a division title. They made the playoffs. Injuries sapped him of his ability, and it wasn't necessarily the fact that the trade didn't work out in the sense that they didn't bring in a good player, because he was really good that first year, but then the injuries hit. Russell Wilson posted a 11-win record in 2 years and didn't even get to the 5-year extension he signed when the Broncos traded for him. And oh, by the way, look at the return packages. I think this is also part of the equation. The Seahawks gave up 2 first-round picks. Yes, Garrett Wilson ended up being a really good player for the Jets, but that is not the lopsided return that we are seeing from the Seahawks, where they have a potential franchise left tackle in Charles Cross, a potential perennial all-pro in Devin Witherspoon. Boy, Mafe could be an all-pro caliber player. He's still figuring things out, and it had almost double-digit sacks last year. And the veterans they brought in as part of that deal, this was such a lopsided contract. And the fact that Russell Wilson didn't even get to that 5-year extension where the team cut bait, to me, this is just comparing really two ugly trades. I just think the fact that the quarterback one blew up the way it did for the Broncos, these are both awful trades that should be in the top 5 all time, but I would give the edge to Russell Wilson being the worst of these two. Up next, we're going to look at the last 2 days from the NFL Scouting Combine. Who are the standouts in the O-line group, as well as the offensive skill positions, running back, receiver, and QB. We'll get to that up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a bit more time for painting and creating artwork. Those of you watching the show can always see a number of my artworks in the background. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Therapy's worked wonders for me over the past few years dealing with health struggles in my family, but don't just take my word for it. Having someone in your corner to guide you when you're struggling to navigate obstacles can be invaluable. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make more time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The NFL Combine has come and gone. This weekend, there were 2 exciting days of workouts. On Saturday, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, the offensive skill positions. And then on Sunday, the buffet bashers, the offensive linemen, 2 totally different groups, and yet there were some historic performances in both of these groups. Rob, let's get to our big winners. And we're actually going to go in reverse here because you and I, we are run game and offensive line guys at heart. So we got to start with day 4. And there's a number of offensive linemen we could talk about, but one big winner from the offensive line group, in your opinion, coming out of Sunday's workouts.
I'm actually going to go with the local guy in Troy Fautanu. This is a guy that, has been projected by many to be a guard. And I think that he won the weigh-in just by stepping up there, measuring in officially with 34.5-inch arms. That is going to erase the concerns that some had about whether he was going to be able to remain outside at that left tackle position. Ran a 5.01 second 40-yard dash. So again, showing the explosiveness, the speed, the agility that you need to have if you are going to be playing as that blindside left tackle. The quickness, the fluidity that he showed in the change of direction drills, the actual positional workouts, not just the timed drills. Corbin, I think that it just kind of reinforced what we had talked about before. There's going to be 5 offensive tackles who are going to come off the board in the first 20 selections. That's never happened before. This class is absolutely loaded. And so if you want to mention a guy like a Taliesin Fuaga, J.C. Latham, a Joe Alt, or a Marius Mims, or again, a Troy Fautanu, all 5 of those guys are going to wind up going very, very early. I think that you had to work out well in this particular class to separate yourself. That's exactly what Troy Fautanu did. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked when they see how many Huskies wind up getting drafted, how many Huskies wind up getting drafted earlier than some of the national pundits are expecting. Troy Fautanu is going to be one of the leaders in that discovery.
Let's go from a consensus first rounder, because I think that's what Fautanu is at this point,
Sure.
and he deserves it. One of the best linemen in the country, to a player at a position that I think is more top heavy, and that's the guard position, where you've got 2 or 3 players that clearly could be first round selections, maybe early second, and then there's a drop off and there's some question marks. One kid that I think might have earned himself maybe 1 or 2 rounds higher in this draft coming from the FCS level, that's Mason McCormick from South Dakota State. We're talking about a 309-pound guard. And what I always look for with offensive linemen, Rob, in the 40, I look at the 10-yard split because I want guys that can get off the ball. And McCormick finished in the top 5 in the offensive line group, a 1.71 10-yard split. He also showed explosiveness in the top 5 with a 35.5-inch vertical jump, a really good 4.45 short shuttle time. Again, this is at 309 pounds. And I've actually gone back and watched some film. I got my hands on some South Dakota State film, one of the perennial powers now at the FCS level. And this guy's got some nastiness. You can see the athleticism, functionality on film, especially in the zone blocking game. He is clearly a day 3 guy, but he was an undrafted free agent, possibly a late 7th round type guy. He might now go in the early part of day 3 because this is a guard class. There's a lot of questions after the first couple of guys. And if you were able to have a good workout and you've got good film, which McCormick does, then you're a guy that can jump up a few rounds. So I think early day 3, we might see him come off the board, and he might fit what the Seahawks are looking for if they want to add another guard to the middle of their offensive line. Now, let's fast forward to Saturday, because that's really what everybody gets excited about. We love the offensive linemen, and really it's the foundation of an offense. But we got to get to the sexy positions: quarterback, running back, receiver. We'll start at quarterback. Not a lot of QBs worked out this weekend, particularly with running the 40 and things of that nature. There were a handful of guys that threw, including Michael Penix. Who is the quarterback that jumped out to you that may have earned some money this weekend in Indianapolis?
Well, I think you have to, again, start off with the University of Washington and Michael Penix Jr., as I mentioned before, Troy Fautanu. But, we talked so much about those top 6 quarterbacks, and everybody is buzzing about them. They may wind up all of them going in the first round. So I'll kind of take the lead from you, sir. You went with kind of a smaller school guy. I'm going to go with a quarterback that is my favorite of the middle round prospects, and that's Spencer Rattler. I mean, this is a 4-year starter. His first couple of seasons, of course, were at Oklahoma. Winds up getting beaten out by the presumptive number 1 overall selection and a 2022 Heisman Trophy winner, Caleb Williams, albeit Williams won that at USC. But still, Corbin, give me a quarterback that has had to overcome some real challenges. And Spencer Rattler, certainly, he was the number 1 rated high school prospect when he signed with Oklahoma, then gets benched. And I can only imagine how it must feel like the world is caving in on you. And instead, he kind of rebuilds himself, goes to South Carolina, gets better competition, and actually proves himself being capable, just as he did in Oklahoma, being able to make every single throw out there. I love the fact that he competed at the Senior Bowl. He competed at the Combine. He didn't have the best of numbers, but he did a good job, not a great job, but a good job of the middle round prospects in this draft class. And Daniel Jeremiah said the same thing basically on the Combine coverage, that Spencer Rattler from South Carolina seems to be everybody's favorite. If the Seahawks do want to take a quarterback in the middle rounds of this year's class, I think that Spencer Rattler checks an awful lot of boxes for the Seahawks. I thought that he helped himself with how well he performed. Not flashy, but as solid as you can be. And again, didn't show a great deal of anger against Oklahoma and kind of spouted off the way that I think some athletes would. That to me is the leadership that I expect from a 4-year start at the quarterback position, and somebody I think that the Seahawks will definitely be keeping their eyes on.
At the quarterback spot, it's tough to have winners in terms of there's no tangible stats coming out of the combine for most of these guys, because Michael Penix didn't do any of the athletic testing, and most of the guys didn't run the 40. Keaton Slovis had the fastest in the 4.5s. There were only 5 guys that ran the 40. Very few did 3-cone. I want to give a shout out to JJ McCarthy, though, because he didn't do the 40, he didn't do the jumps, but he actually did the 2 agility drills, and he had a 6.83 second 3-cone drill. That would be elite at the cornerback spot. And he did it as a quarterback. So those of you that question his athleticism, just watch the guy's change of direction skills and watch some film, because the guy is a really good runner with the football. So him and Michael Penix, I can't spout on any stats because he didn't do any testing, but you can see why a lot of people consider him one of the most, if not the most gifted passer in this class. And he showed that off in Indianapolis. I'm going to cheat because it's our show and I do what I want. Instead of having a quarterback for this segment, I'm going with a running back, because you barely touched on him during my mock draft thing in the beginning of the show. And I know Seahawks fans are like, why are we drafting a running back? But DJ Dallas is a free agent. They don't have anybody on their roster that has extensive experience as a third down back. We don't know what Kenny McIntosh is capable of at this point. He didn't play really last year. Kamani Vidal, I thought, had the most impressive any line. We're talking 210-pound running back, 5'8", 210. So he is a squatty brick, but he ran a 4.46, 37.5-inch vertical jump. It almost got under 7 seconds in the 3-cone drill. This guy's a complete package. He can bowl guys over. He has a low center of gravity, break arm tackles. He was the number 7 ranked pass protecting running back in the country, according to Pro Football Focus. I turn on the film. His pass protection makes your jaw drop. So I didn't know what to expect from an athleticism standpoint, but this guy can catch the ball like a receiver. He can pass protect. So I think he made himself a lot of money in a very muddied up running back class. It doesn't necessarily have anybody that's elite that's going to be a first rounder. This is a guy that might very easily climb early day 3. And if you're a team needing a running back and you want to get one of the first guys off the board, he showed against these other running backs that he can compete with any of them. Real quick, Rob, let's get to the receiver position. Who's your winner at the receiver spot and why?
Well, I love the fact that you just mentioned Kamani Vidal. I mean, one of the stubbiest running backs in this draft class, and they're a legitimate sleeper. I'm going to go with one of the most accomplished superstars, actually led all of college football with 17 touchdown receptions, and he is the exact opposite of Kamani Vidal. And Brian Thomas Jr., Corbin, is 6'3", 209 pounds, and he ran a 4.33 40-yard dash. Everybody's going to be talking about the record-breaking 40-yard dash by Xavier Worthy. Brian Thomas Jr. is 35 pounds heavier and ran a 4.33. His fluidity, his ball skills. This is a guy that you mentioned. There was a question before about if the Seahawks somehow are sitting at number 16 overall and Brock Bowers falls into the lap. Should they make that selection? I think a very interesting conversation is if Brian Thomas Jr. is available at number 16 overall, given the receivers that are already on this roster. Should the Seahawks stand pat and select this dynamic wideout? I actually think that they should consider it. He is that good. He is special. And again, he is a player that I think, because of all of the hype about the quarterback, Jaden Daniels, the other wide receiver, Malik Neighbors, I think that you are going to see 4 wide receivers come off the board, the top 12, 14 selections. If Brian Thomas Jr. happens to fall into Seattle's lap, John Schneider might just have to pull up the trigger because this guy is that good.
It would also increase the value of that pick if they want to trade back too, because there will be teams, there's going to be a drop-off after there's first 4 or 5 receivers. Yes, you mentioned Xavier Worthy. I know he's lighter, but come on, Rob. 4.21. Yep. That's you blink and the guy's done. Incredible. NFL Combine record. And this is, I know John Ross had really good production at Washington, but Xavier Worthy is one of the best receivers coming into this draft class. If you watch Texas this year, his ability to make plays with the football, this guy is a developed receiver that has been healthy for the most part. We know John Ross had those questions. I know teams, they look at the 40 time and it isn't necessarily everything, but this guy jumped out of the building, one of the highest vertical jumps, and he's got great statistics, really soft hands, a good route runner to go with that speed. So this is another one of those receivers that could very easily be in that first-round discussion and certainly made himself a lot of money with that record-setting 40 time. As always, you can follow me on X and Fred at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on tomorrow's show, we're going to start shifting our attention back to free agency, looking at some of the offensive linemen that Seattle has set to hit the market. Is there any possibility the Seahawks could bring any of those players back? We'll be revisiting that topic and more coming up on tomorrow's show. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.